There is no apparent reason for it, but suddenly people who were previously healthy were affected by sensations of violent fever in the head and a redness and inflammation of the eyes. Internally, both the throat and the tongue immediately became bloody and emitted an unnatural and foul-smelling breath. At the next stage, the victim suffered an onset of sneezing and hoarseness, and soon afterwards the affliction went to the chest, accompanied by violent coughing. When it took hold in the stomach, it caused severe upset there, and every kind of bile that's been named by physicians was discharged, attended by extreme distress. In most cases, an empty retching ensued, producing violent spasms. In some cases, straight after the emissions had ceased, in others, much later. Externally, the body was not particularly hot to the touch, nor pale, but was reddish and livid, breaking out in small blisters and sores. Internally, however, sufferers were on fire and could not bear contact with the lightest of clothing and linens or anything other than going naked, and what they most felt like was throwing themselves into cold water. Indeed, many who were not being looked after actually did so, jumping into rain tanks, possessed by a thirst that could not be quenched, since it made no difference whether they drank much or little. New symptoms, perhaps, coming out of China? Italy? Hardly. What I just read there is from Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War, ancient wisdom from modern times, 2,500 years ago approximately. What is recounted there is the plague that afflicted the Athenians. Now, one of the things I've always found interesting about this particular text, and increasingly so in the context of the COVID-19 that we're experiencing today, is how you start to hear some rumblings on the periphery of people beginning to tout the supposed virtues of an authoritarian system like that of China in dealing with this crisis. I think Thucydides' narrative, almost despite itself, because he seems to show a bit of a preference for the Spartan form of government, his narrative demonstrates, though, the incredible ability of a free society to bounce back from any sort of adversity. The plague in Athens, for example, happens right at the beginning of the war, knocking out no fewer than a third of the population. And yet, the Athenians bounce back. They witness other upsets over the course of the war, but they keep coming back. If anything, Thucydides' tale is indicative of some of the dangers that lurk within a free society and the hubris that is innate in freedom. But that's a story for another time. What I want to focus on, though, is the fact that the Athenians, with their dogged persistence, their boundless creativity, are far more dynamic society and far better prepared for any sort of adversity than anybody else. Much like us today, they make a virtue of necessity, which is the same sort of thing, this sort of disruption is the same sort of thing that's going to affect startups, established companies. It's going to force them to foster discipline, prudent spending. Over the course of the past few weeks or months before all of this happened, you may have used an Uber, for example, to get from the airport. An Uber instead of a cab because you can do it from your phone. It's a lot more convenient, cheaper, that sort of thing. You may have decided to take that Uber not to a hotel, but maybe to an Airbnb. I know for the last several years, whenever my wife and I travel, we go stay in an Airbnb. Also, in some respects, more convenient. You have the feel of your own sort of apartment and whatnot. So you have a sense of greater liberty there, but it also tends to be cheaper. Nowadays, we might be communicating even more frequently with friends, family, colleagues as well over WhatsApp. All three of those companies that I just named were created in the wake of the financial crisis in 08, 09. All three emerged during periods of great adversity. Because adversity forces us to find alternatives. And human ingenuity, human beings, when let loose, they will always find an alternative, even in circumstances where you might not expect it. Even in an authoritarian regime like that of the USSR, human ingenuity led to the creation of a black market, as well as a culture of dissimulation and lying. Luckily, we here in our freer societies don't have to deal with such terrible constraints. Adversity may not have led us to try and use our freedom to aspire to the higher virtues, for example, but I should hope that in the time that we have spent at home, we have learned to cultivate an appreciation for some of the finer things in life. For example, in my hometown of Vienna, Austria, I've been told that supermarkets such as Billa, as well as farms and whatnot, are beginning to deliver produce, meat, milk, and that sort of thing with ever greater frequency directly to your home. What convenience! What a great idea! I've even been told, in the same vein, that in New York City, there's a cocktail delivery service. Well, lucky for me, in my time at home, one of the things I've learned how to cultivate is an appreciation for a damn good dry gin martini. So stay safe, everybody, and innovate.